The Keth-Mori had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years before humanity took its first steps beyond Earth's atmosphere. They were apex predators in every sense of the word, standing 12 feet tall with razor-sharp claws that could slice through steel plating and minds that viewed every other species as nothing more than cattle to be harvested. When the first human exploration vessel, the UES Discovery, encountered a Keth-Mori hunting fleet near the Proxima system, Captain Sarah Chen thought she was witnessing a rescue operation. The massive alien ships surrounded what appeared to be a damaged civilian transport, and Chen ordered her communications officer to hail them, offering assistance. The response came not in words but in weapons fire. The Discovery's shields held against the initial barrage. But Chen quickly realized this was no misunderstanding. Through the view screen, she watched in horror as the Keth-Mori vessels opened their cargo bays and began loading what were clearly sentient beings into containment pods. The creatures being taken were small, about human-sized, with 4 arms and crystal-like skin that sparkled even in the dim light of space. "Captain, they're not rescuing anyone," reported Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station. "They're hunting them." Chen had served in Earth's naval forces before joining the Space Exploration Division. She had seen war, had seen cruelty, but nothing had prepared her for what she witnessed next. One of the crystal-skinned beings broke free from its captors and ran across the hull of the transport ship, trying to reach an escape pod. A Keth-Mori warrior simply pointed a device at the fleeing creature and activated it. The being didn't die quickly. Instead, its crystal skin began to change color, shifting from a beautiful blue-white to deep purple, then to black. It fell to its knees, clearly in agony as its own body turned against it. The Keth-Mori warrior walked over casually and picked up the writhing creature, examining it like a scientist might study an interesting specimen. "What the hell was that?" whispered Ensign Park from the navigation console. Chen's jaw tightened. Torture. The Keth-Mori had perfected the art of causing pain. Their technology could trigger nerve responses in most carbon-based life forms, turning the victim's own nervous system into an instrument of suffering. They didn't kill their prey immediately because dead meat spoiled quickly. Instead, they kept their victims alive and in constant agony, believing that the fear and pain improved the taste. As Chen watched, more crystal-skinned beings were subjected to the same treatment. Some tried to fight back with primitive weapons, but their technology was no match for Keth-Mori neural disruptors. Others attempted to shield their young, but the hunters simply activated their pain devices on the children first, using their screams to break the adults' resistance. "Captain," Torres spoke up, his voice tight with anger. "We have weapons. We could help them." Chen looked at her crew of 37 humans aboard a scientific vessel armed with nothing more than basic defensive systems. The Keth-Mori hunting fleet consisted of 8 warships, each one easily capable of destroying the Discovery. But as she watched another child's crystal skin turn black with induced agony, Chen made a decision that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "Red alert," she announced. "All hands to battle stations." The Discovery's attack was suicide, and everyone aboard knew it. Their small plasma cannons barely scratched the Keth-Mori shields, and their torpedo complement consisted of exactly 6 mining charges designed for asteroid work. But Chen wasn't trying to win a battle. She was trying to buy time for the surviving crystal-skinned beings to escape. The Keth-Mori response was swift and overwhelming. The Discovery's shields collapsed under focused fire from 3 warships, and hull breaches began to vent atmosphere into space. But the distraction worked. Several escape pods launched from the transport ship, carrying the few survivors away from the hunting fleet. As the Discovery's bridge filled with smoke and sparks, Chen transmitted a message on all frequencies. It was a simple message, broadcast in the common galactic trade language that her linguistic team had recently decoded. This is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth Vessel Discovery. We bear witness to your crimes. Humanity remembers." The Kethmori found the message amusing. 3 days later, a Kethmori diplomat named Vex Thul arrived at Earth's lunar orbital station. He came alone, his massive frame barely fitting through the station's corridors, his predatory eyes scanning every human he encountered as if evaluating them for nutritional value. "I represent the Kethmori hegemony," he announced to the hastily assembled Earth Council. "We are the dominant species in this galaxy. You will submit to our authority and provide tribute, or you will be harvested like the others." Secretary General Elizabeth Harris, representing Earth's unified government, stood to address the alien. She was a small woman, barely reaching Vex Thul's knee even when he was seated, but her voice carried across the chamber with absolute authority. "We received your message about Captain Chen and her crew," Harris said. "We know what you did to them." Vex Thul's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. "The weak perish. That is the natural order. Your Captain Chen was weak, and now she is meat in our storage holds, kept fresh by pain amplifiers. Would you like to hear her screams? We recorded them for our entertainment." The chamber fell silent. Harris studied the alien for a long moment, her face expressionless. When she spoke again, her words would be quoted in history books for millennia to come. "You have made a mistake," she said quietly. "You have misunderstood what humans are capable of when we become truly angry." Vex Thul stood to his full height, towering over the human delegation. "Your entire species would make perhaps one meal for my clan. You have no weapons that can harm us, no ships that can match ours, no technology that we have not already surpassed. What could you possibly do to us?" Harris smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several nearby humans step back instinctively. It was the smile of a predator recognizing prey. "You're about to find out," she said. Within hours of Vex Thul's departure, every human military installation on Earth and Luna shifted into wartime production. Factories that had been building colony ships began manufacturing weapon systems. Mining operations in the asteroid belt started producing military-grade armor plating. Research facilities that had been working on peaceful applications of fusion technology suddenly found new applications for their work. But the real change wasn't in Earth's industrial capacity. It was in humanity itself. News of Captain Chen's fate spread across human space like wildfire. The recordings of the crystal-skinned being's torture, transmitted by the Discovery before its destruction, were broadcast on every network. Humanity saw what the Kethmori did to sentient species, how they hunted children for sport, how they kept their victims alive and in agony for the sake of flavor enhancement. Recruitment centers couldn't handle the flood of volunteers. Men and women who had never held a weapon in their lives signed up for military service. Scientists abandoned peaceful research projects to develop new methods of war. Engineers worked around the clock, designing ships built for one purpose: hunting Kethmori. The transformation was so rapid and complete that it caught even Earth's own leaders off guard. Within 6 months, humanity had gone from a peaceful, exploration-focused civilization to something that made veteran military commanders nervous. Dr. James Wright, Earth's leading xenobiologist, studied every piece of data they had on Kethmori physiology. He worked 18-hour days, driven by images of Captain Chen's final transmission. When he finally emerged from his laboratory, he carried blueprints for weapons designed specifically to exploit Kethmori biology. "They use pain as a tool," he explained to the War Council. "Their entire nervous system is designed around the concept of inflicting and withstanding suffering. But that sensitivity works both ways. If we can reverse their own neural disruptors..." The implications were clear. Humanity was preparing to fight monsters by becoming something even worse. Admiral Marcus Torres, Lieutenant Torres's father and now commander of the Earth Defense Fleet, stood before the assembled captains of humanity's first military fleet. 68 ships, each one built for war, each one carrying crews who had volunteered knowing they might never see Earth again. "The Kethemori think we're prey," Torres told his captains. "They think humans are just another species to be harvested and eaten. They're wrong. We're not prey. We're something they've never encountered before, a species that hunts back." The fleet launched on the first anniversary of the Discovery's destruction. As they departed Earth's system, every ship carried the same message painted on its hull in letters visible from orbit: Chen's Revenge. Unknown to humanity, several species across the galaxy monitored their communications, watched their military buildup, and observed their transformation with growing unease. The Peace. The first Kethemori hunting fleet to encounter humanity's new military force was led by War Chief Zekthros, a veteran hunter with over 200 successful harvests to his name. His fleet of 12 vessels had just finished processing a colony of the rabbit-like Veltari when long-range sensors detected an approaching human squadron. Zekthros examined the readings with amusement. 6 small human ships, each no larger than a Kethemori escort vessel, approaching his position with what appeared to be suicidal confidence. The war chief remembered the human captain who had dared to interfere with his cousin's hunt a year ago. Her meat had been particularly sweet, seasoned with terror and defiance. "Prepare the neural disruptors," he ordered his crew. "These humans will make excellent examples for the rest of their species." What Zekthros didn't know was that humanity had spent the past year studying every piece of Kethemori technology they could find. The wreckage of the Discovery had provided crucial data, but more importantly, humanity had made contact with species that had survived Kethemori hunts. The crystal-skinned Velturi, the insectoid Chakri, and dozens of other survivors had shared their knowledge of Kethemori tactics, technology, and most crucially, their weaknesses. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded the human squadron aboard the UES Nemesis. Her ship's hull bore scorch marks from the construction yards, where workers had literally welded weapons into place while the paint was still wet. Every human vessel in the fleet had been built with one principle in mind: kill Kethemori quickly and efficiently. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported her tactical officer. "Enemy formation is standard hunting pattern. They're not even raising shields." Rodriguez smiled grimly. The Kethemori arrogance would be their downfall. For 3 millennia, they had been apex predators, facing species with inferior technology and peaceful intentions. They had never encountered an enemy that came prepared for war. "Launch the screamer pods," Rodriguez ordered. Humanity's first weapon wasn't kinetic or energy-based, it was psychological. The screamer pods were Dr. Wright's first innovation. Small drones that broadcast concentrated neural feedback on frequencies specifically tuned to Kethemori brain patterns. As the pods deployed around Zekthros's fleet, every Kethemori on every ship suddenly experienced a sensation their species had never felt before: pure, overwhelming terror. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Kethemori warriors who had tortured thousands of victims found themselves paralyzed by fear so intense that their nervous systems began shutting down. Their own neural disruptors, designed to cause pain in other species, proved useless against an enemy that attacked the mind directly. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. As the Kethemori fleet struggled to comprehend what was happening to them, her ships launched their primary weapons: kinetic penetrators loaded with a substance that human scientists had nicknamed Nightmare Compound. The compound was derived from modified Kethemori neural disruptor technology, but instead of causing pain, it triggered every fear response in the alien brain simultaneously. A single penetrator breaching a Kethemori hull would release enough compound to affect the entire crew within minutes. Zekthros tried to order a retreat, but his vocal cords wouldn't respond. The terror was too complete, too all-consuming. He watched helplessly as human ships moved through his fleet like sharks among minnows, disabling vessels without destroying them. The humans weren't trying to kill his crews quickly. They were keeping them alive, trapped in their own personal nightmares. The final transmission from Zekthros' fleet was received by Keth Mori Command 3 days later. It consisted of 12 hours of continuous screaming from over 3,000 veteran hunters, reduced to quivering animals by substances that turned their own predatory instincts against them. The message ended with a single human voice, speaking in perfect Keth Mori. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Fleet. Your war chief Zekthros and his hunters are alive. They are experiencing a level of terror that we have calculated to be approximately equivalent to what your victims feel under neural disruptor torture. They will remain in this state until they die of dehydration, which our medical experts estimate will take 14 to 18 days. Consider this a demonstration of humanity's new capabilities." The transmission concluded with coordinates and a simple ultimatum. "Surrender all captured sentient beings, and we will make their deaths quick." The Keth Mori High Command had ruled the galaxy for millennia through overwhelming force and calculated cruelty. They had never encountered a species that could match their brutality and exceed their technological capabilities. The loss of Zekthros' fleet should have been devastating news, but War Prime Thekvorlith viewed it as an opportunity. "These humans have shown cunning," he admitted to his war council, "but they are still weak. One victory does not make them a threat to the hegemony. We will respond with overwhelming force and remind the galaxy why they fear us." Thekvorlith assembled the largest Keth Mori fleet in recorded history, 300 warships, carrying over 50,000 warriors, supported by neural disruptor satellites capable of inducing pain across entire star systems. It was enough firepower to devastate a dozen civilizations. But humanity was already 3 steps ahead. Admiral Torres had spent months studying Keth Mori fleet movements, using data provided by grateful survivor species. He knew where Thekvorlith would strike, when he would arrive, and exactly how many ships he would bring. More importantly, Torres knew something that the War Prime didn't. Humanity had allies now. The Battle of the Kepler 442 system lasted 6 hours and became known as the Terror's End throughout the galaxy. When Thekvorlith's massive fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found themselves facing not just 60 human warships, but a combined force of over 400 vessels from 18 different species. The crystal-skinned Velturi provided ships equipped with advanced shielding technology. The insectoid Chakri contributed swarm fighters that could operate in conditions that would kill most pilots. The aquatic Mordesh brought weapons that fired superheated plasma through specialized magnetic containment fields. Every species that had suffered under Keth Mori rule for centuries had come to witness their destroyer's defeat. But the true shock for the Keth Mori came when they attempted to use their neural disruptors. The weapons that had been their ultimate advantage for millennia simply didn't work. Every ship in the Allied fleet had been equipped with neural dampening fields, technology developed by human scientists working with survivors who understood Keth Mori methods better than the Keth Mori understood themselves. "Impossible," Thekvorlith snarled as his weapons proved useless. "Our disruptors work on all carbon-based neural systems." His science officer studied the readings frantically. "War Prime, the humans have somehow reversed our own technology. Their neural dampeners are broadcasting interference patterns that neutralize our weapons entirely." Without their primary weapon, the Keth Mori found themselves fighting a conventional space battle against opponents who had spent a year preparing specifically for this moment. Human ships moved with precision formations that maximized firepower while minimizing exposure. Their weapons were designed to penetrate Keth Mori armor, and their tactics were based on complete knowledge of enemy capabilities. But the most terrifying aspect of the battle, from the Keth Mori perspective, was the humans themselves. Every other species in the galaxy fought with passion, anger, or desperation. Humans fought with cold, methodical efficiency that was somehow more frightening than any emotion. Captain Rodriguez, now commanding a heavy cruiser, watched as her weapons systematically disabled a Kethmori battleship. Her crew worked with mechanical precision, targeting specific systems to cripple the enemy vessel without destroying it. This wasn't about destruction. This was about capture. "Target their communication array next," she ordered. "I want them alive to broadcast what happens to species that hunt sentient beings for food." The battle ended with the complete defeat of Thek-Vorleth's fleet. Of the 300 Kethmori warships, 247 were captured intact. The rest had self-destructed rather than face capture, but not before their crews experienced the same terror weapons that had broken Zekthros's hunters. As the surviving Kethmori were loaded into containment vessels, representatives from the allied species gathered aboard Admiral Torres's flagship to witness something unprecedented in galactic history: the trial of an entire species. "For 3,000 years, Torres announced, his words broadcast across the galaxy, the Kethmori have terrorized every sentient species they encountered. They have turned suffering into entertainment and fear into seasoning for their meals. Today, that ends." The trial lasted 3 days. Evidence was presented by dozens of species, testimonies from survivors who had endured Kethmori torture, recordings of hunts where children were used as bait to capture their parents. The accumulated evidence painted a picture of systematic, industrial-scale genocide that had claimed billions of lives across the centuries. Thek-Vorleth, speaking for his species, showed no remorse. "We are apex predators," he declared. "It is our nature to hunt. You cannot judge a shark for eating fish, or a human for consuming lesser animals. We take what we need to survive." Torres studied the war prime for a long moment. "You're right about one thing," he said finally. "Predators do hunt. But you made one fatal mistake. You assumed you were the apex predator in this galaxy." The sentence was unanimous among all allied species: extinction, but not the quick death that most condemned species received. The Kethmori would face the same fate they had imposed on countless others. They would be hunted across the galaxy until none remained. What followed became known as the Great Hunt, the first and only example in galactic history of an entire species being systematically tracked down and eliminated by a coalition of their former victims. Human ships led the hunt, but every species that had suffered under Kethmori rule contributed vessels, intelligence, and resources. The Kethmori tried to hide in deep space, in dead systems, in dimensions between normal space-time. It didn't matter. Humanity had learned patience from the best teachers in the galaxy, the survivors who had waited centuries for justice. Every hiding place was eventually found, every safe house eventually compromised. The last Kethmori stronghold fell 18 months after the Battle of Kepler 442. As human marines stormed the final fortress, they found thousands of containment pods filled with victims from dozens of species, all kept alive and in constant agony as emergency food supplies. Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to admiral, stood in the fortress's main hall as the last Kethmori leaders were brought before her in restraints. War Prime Thek-Vorleth was among them, his predatory eyes now filled with the same terror he had once inflicted on others. "Any last words?" Rodriguez asked. Thek-Vorleth's mandibles clicked weakly. You have become monsters to defeat us. What does that make you?" Rodriguez considered the question for a moment, then looked at the freed victims being carried out on medical stretchers, some of whom had been tortured for decades. "It makes us human," she said simply, and gave the order to activate the neural disruptors. Aphel humans who had first ventured into space had become something else entirely. They had become hunters, and somewhere in the deep space between stars, Keth-Mori hunting fleets continued their ancient practice, unaware that for the first time in their species' history, they were now the prey. 50 years had passed since the last confirmed Keth-Mori sighting, and the galaxy had grown accustomed to a new reality. Children of a dozen species played games in starports that humans had built, their laughter echoing through corridors where once only screams had been heard. The great trading stations that humans established had become centers of learning and culture, places where species that had hidden in fear for millennia could finally emerge and share their knowledge. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now director of the Galactic Memorial Institute, walked through the museum's newest exhibition with visiting delegates from the Outer Rim worlds. The memorial had been built on the ruins of the largest Keth-Mori fortress ever discovered, and its halls contained artifacts and testimonies from over 300 species that had suffered under their reign. "This is the final recording we have of them," Dr. Vasquez explained, stopping before a sealed chamber. Through the reinforced glass, visitors could see a small device that contained the last transmission ever sent by a Keth-Mori vessel. It was intercepted by a human patrol ship near the Andromeda Gateway, approximately 47 years ago. The recording had become legendary across the galaxy. It showed the final moments of War Chief Kesavale, the last known Keth-Mori leader, trapped aboard a crippled ship as human vessels closed in around him. His final words had been translated into over 500 languages and were taught to children as both history and warning. "We were the apex predators of this galaxy for 3,000 years. In 3 years, the humans made us extinct. If any who hear this recording encounter these beings, remember this truth. Humans are not prey. They are the reason predators learn to hide." A young Velturi delegate, her crystal skin shimmering with curiosity, raised her four-armed hand. "Dr. Vasquez, my elders tell stories about the human hunters. They say humans could track a single Keth-Mori across multiple star systems, that they never gave up, never stopped hunting. Is this true?" Dr. Vasquez nodded gravely. "The pursuit of the Keth-Mori was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human vessels would follow traces of their prey for months, sometimes years. They developed new technologies specifically for hunting, quantum trackers that could follow hyperspace signatures across vast distances, neural scanners that could identify Keth-Mori brainwave patterns from light years away. Even temporal sensors that could detect where a Keth-Mori ship had been by analyzing distortions in space-time. She led the group to another exhibit, a scale model of a human hunter-killer ship. The vessel was sleek, predatory in design, equipped with weapons that could disable rather than destroy. Every line of its construction spoke to a single purpose, finding and capturing Keth-Mori alive. But the most remarkable aspect, Dr. Vasquez continued, wasn't their technology, it was their determination. Humans assigned to hunter-killer squadrons would spend their entire careers tracking single targets. Some hunters pursued the same Keth-Mori for decades, studying their patterns, learning their habits, becoming intimately familiar with their quarry before finally closing the trap. The stories had become legend indeed. Admiral Catherine Singh, who had hunted War Chief Mol Grathan for 15 years across 17 star systems before finally cornering him in an abandoned nebula. Commander David Park, who had tracked a Keth-Mori slaver through 4 different galaxies using nothing but hyperspace wake analysis and intuition. Captain Maria Santos, who had spent 12 years posing as a merchant trader to infiltrate a Keth-Mori supply network, feeding information to human fleets until the entire organization was captured in a single coordinated strike. Each story had been meticulously documented, not as propaganda, but as historical record. Future generations needed to understand what humans were capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. The Chakri delegate, an insectoid being whose species had nearly been driven extinct by Keth-Mori hive raids, clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. Our historical records suggest that humans changed during this period. They became something different from the species that first emerged from their home system. Do you agree with this assessment? Dr. Vasquez paused at a display case containing the personal effects of Captain Sarah Chen, the woman whose death had started humanity's transformation. Her uniform, her final transmission logs, her personal diary, all preserved as artifacts of the moment when humanity's path had been forever altered. "Yes," she said quietly. "The humans who fought the Keth Mori were not the same species that had peacefully explored space 50 years earlier. War changes all species, but humans became something that even they didn't fully recognize. The evidence was everywhere for those who knew how to look. Human language had evolved during the war years, developing new words for concepts that had never existed before. Xenocide, for the deliberate extinction of an alien species. Pursuit absolute for the human practice of never abandoning a hunt regardless of time or cost. Memorial justice for the custom of broadcasting enemy suffering as tribute to their victims. Human culture had shifted as well. Before the war, humanity had valued exploration, scientific advancement, and peaceful contact with alien civilizations. After the war, human society had reorganized itself around a single principle, ensuring that what happened to Captain Chen and her crew would never happen again to any sentient being. This had led to the creation of the Human Peacekeeping Corps, a military organization unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Unlike traditional armies that existed to protect their own species, the Corps existed specifically to protect others. Human fleets patrolled trade routes not for profit, but to ensure that no species would ever again face extinction at the hands of predators. The Corps had grown to become the largest military force in galactic history, with over 10 million human personnel stationed across 47 different galaxies. They asked for nothing in return except the promise that member species would notify them immediately if any new predator species emerged. "But surely," pressed the Velturi delegate, "humans must have gained something from their victory? Territorial expansion, resource extraction, political dominance?" Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly. "That's what every species expected." After humanity demonstrated the ability to hunt an apex predator species to extinction, everyone assumed humans would become the new dominant power. Instead, humanity did something unprecedented. They voluntarily limited their own power. The Human Limitation Accords had been signed 20 years after the last Keth Mori was confirmed dead. In the Accords, humanity had agreed to several restrictions on their own capabilities. They would never use their most advanced weapons against non-predator species. They would never claim territory beyond what was necessary for defensive purposes. And most importantly, they would never hunt a sentient species for any reason other than protecting others from extinction. The Accords had been humanity's attempt to address what they themselves had recognized as a dangerous transformation. In becoming effective enough to hunt the Keth Mori, humans had developed capabilities and mindsets that could potentially threaten all other species. The Accords were their way of ensuring they would never become what they had destroyed. But not everyone believed the Accords would hold forever. As the tour group moved through the museum's final chamber, they encountered the exhibit that drew the most visitors and generated the most controversy. The sealed vault containing Keth Mori genetic material and complete technological databases. Everything needed to potentially recreate the species was stored here, under guard by both human and alien security forces. "Why preserve them at all?" asked the Chakri delegate. "Surely true justice would be complete obliteration." Dr. Vasquez stood before the vault for a long moment before answering. "Because humanity learned something important during their war against the Keth Mori. They learned that the ability to completely destroy something gives you the responsibility to choose not to. Every day that humanity chooses not to resurrect the Keth Mori is a day that they prove they are not the monsters they once hunted. The real reason for preservation was more complex, though Dr. Vasquez rarely discussed it publicly. Humanity had preserved the Keth Mori because they understood that future generations might face similar threats. The galaxy was vast, and somewhere in its unexplored regions, other predator species might exist. If humanity ever needed to become hunters again, they wanted to remember exactly what that meant. As the delegates departed, Dr. B. Vasquez remained in the memorial's central hall, surrounded by the testimonies of survivors and the artifacts of extinct monsters. She thought about the reports that occasionally crossed her desk: sightings of unknown vessels in distant systems, unexplained disappearances of small colonies, strange signals that might or might not indicate intelligent life. The Peacekeeping Corps investigated every report, but so far nothing had proven to be a genuine threat. The galaxy had been peaceful for 50 years, and many species had begun to believe that humanity's transformation had been unnecessary, that the Keth Mori threat had been exaggerated. Dr. Vasquez knew better. She had studied the historical records, had interviewed the veterans who had fought in the Great Hunt. She understood what humanity had become and why it had been necessary. More importantly, she understood that the capacity for that transformation still existed. In the deepest archives of the memorial, accessible only to the highest levels of human leadership, there were files that contained detailed profiles of every known intelligent species in the galaxy. Not cultural studies or diplomatic briefings, but hunter-killer assessments: how to track them, how to capture them, how to eliminate them if they ever became a threat to other sentient life. Humanity hoped they would never need that information again. But they had learned the hard way that hoping for peace was not enough. Sometimes, monsters existed, and when they did, humanity would be ready to become something even worse. On a distant world at the edge of explored space, a Velturi child found a strange object buried in the ruins of what had once been a settlement. The object was black metal, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. When she brought it to her elders, they recognized it immediately: Keth Mori technology, a neural disruptor, still functional after all these years. Within hours, the find had been reported to the nearest human Peacekeeping Corps station. Within days, a full investigation team had arrived to examine the site. Within weeks, 3 human hunter-killer ships had been deployed to patrol the surrounding systems. The official report concluded that the device was a relic from the final days of the war, abandoned and forgotten in the chaos of the last Keth Mori retreats. There was no evidence of living Keth Mori in the area, no indication that any had survived their species' extinction. But the ships remained on patrol anyway, because humanity remembered what they had learned 50 years ago. The price of complacency was measured in the screams of the innocent. And while humans had learned to control the monsters they had become, they had never forgotten how to unleash them. In the vast darkness between the galaxies, where even human sensors could not reach, something stirred, something that might have once been Keth Mori, or might have been something worse. It watched the settled regions of space with ancient hunger and calculated patience, but it had heard the legends too. It knew what had happened to the last species that made humans truly angry, and so it waited and planned and wondered if the stories were really true. Somewhere on Earth, in a quiet office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, an old man named James Wright reviewed daily reports from across the galaxy. Dr. Wright had been retired for 20 years, but he still consulted for the Peacekeeping Corps on matters of xenobiology and threat assessment. His latest project was a theoretical one. What would humanity need to become to face a threat even worse than the Keth Mori? What capabilities would be required to hunt something that had learned from the Keth Mori's mistakes? Something that knew how dangerous humans could become? Dr. Wright hoped his research would remain theoretical forever, but he worked on it anyway, because he had learned something important during the war years. Humanity's greatest strength was not their capacity for violence, but their willingness to become whatever was necessary to protect others. The galaxy was at peace. Children played in stations built by humans. Trade flowed along routes patrolled by human ships, and species that had hidden in fear for millennia now thrived in the open. But in the darkness between stars, predators still lurked. And on countless worlds humanity kept watch, maintaining their vigil with the patience of apex predators who had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the only thing that can stop a monster is something even more monstrous. The legend of the Keth Mori lived on, told around campfires and in school classrooms across 1,000 worlds. But the legend that mattered more was the one whispered in the dark places where predators gathered. The legend of what humans became when they decided that something needed to die. And in that legend, every monster in the galaxy heard the same warning. Humanity remembers.